Sherlock Holmes. Detective, smart guy. He's one of the most famous characters in Western canon, apart from, like, Jesus and maybe the Geico Gecko. So it makes sense that a bunch of people would want to adapt his story. When I was younger, two popular adaptations of Sherlock came out within about a year of each other. The first one was a 2009 action comedy period mystery starring Robert Downey Jr. And then in 2010, the BBC came out with what was essentially a series of made-for-TV movies by Stephen Moffat, who was then famous in nerd circles for his work on Doctor Who. And it seems to me like this version's main selling point was that it was a modern day adaptation. And at least in the hot topics that I went into, I could tell which adaptation was the most culturally successful. The movie was reviewed pretty well and it made money, but it was a mere flash in the pan compared to the much more angsty, updated version, at least for my demographic of teenage girls who always did the extra credit. But it's been a while, and there has been discourse on discourse on discourse in the coming years, mainly as BBC's Sherlock fell out of favor after some less than stellar later seasons. To me, Sherlock in its truest form is just those first two seasons, which is mainly what I'm going to talk about. But I wanted to use Robert Downey Jr. / Guy Ritchie's Sherlock as basically a point of comparison to wonder, was the BBC's version overvalued from the beginning? But first off, I need to disclose that I am a fake fan. I've never read Arthur Conan Doyle. The first time I ever interacted with the character of Sherlock Holmes in any meaningful way was at the movie theater in 2009. And then I didn't think about it at all until I saw like 80 horny gifs of Benedict Cumberbatch taking a scarf off a year later. And with any beloved character, there are critics of both pieces of media saying that they totally ruined the character and the adaptation isn't in good faith. But I need to be clear. I do not know if they ruined it. I am only here to talk about the first Sherlock movie and the beginning of the show, so I can think about which adaptation might be a more engaging story, and which one has the strongest rewatch value. So firstly, I should point out that it is kind of hard to compare a made-for-TV series of movies with a not minuscule but sizable budget to a $90 million blockbuster action comedy. One clearly looks like it is just dripping in cash, especially because it's a period story. And they really do an excellent job of recreating late 19th century London. It has a similar desaturated, dirty, heavily industrial vibe that Peaky Blinders kind of exists in, except you know, the characters in this movie are actually allowed to feel joy. But really, the design was impeccable. And since I don't watch movies trying to actively catch VFX artists in their wizardry, there were actually only a few shots in the whole movie that kind of struck my lizard brain as just being a little off because of the CGI. And for 2009, that is great. There are all kinds of action set pieces in shipping yards, through circuses, and that really scratches the dopamine-starved walls of my brain like TikTok does. And for that, I applaud it. Sherlock the show is at its core a TV drama, which means that there are less of those big set pieces and the focus is really more on the characters, their conversations, and the mystery. It was made by TV writers with a TV budget. And since it's set in present-day London, they could just use normal London for their exterior shots without ever having to rent a horse. Their, let's say, strength as dialogue people does show a little bit more in some of the action scenes. Specifically, this one chase scene where I kept being like, okay, but why does it keep cutting back to shots of street signs? And then I realized, oh my god, it was just because they just filmed Sherlock and John running around.
Open it up!
The modernization of the show, on top of making everything more economically feasible, was also just a vibe. Because this is present day, but it also kind of looks like Christopher Nolan's London, like everything's very sleek and gray. And since the show is totally of the moment, they made technology a big part of some of the mysteries. The additions are very fun, but they did date the story quite a lot, because several times Sherlock deduces a clue about someone's new expensive phone, and then the phone in question is like an iPhone 3. And tonally, it is definitely a drama, but it also feels a little quippy. I feel like these terse, very stylized, clever sounding, very quotable bits of dialogue are kind of like Stephen Moffat's calling card.
You want to remember, Sherlock, I was a soldier. I killed people. You were a doctor. I had bad days.
And sometimes I'm like, damn, This is not how a normal person talks, but boy, does it look great in a gift set. And hey, you know, I can still quote a lot of these exchanges from memory, so it does work. So apart from the setting and the overall vision of the work, I feel like the next most important thing of these adaptations is what they do with their main character. After all, Sherlock is the reason why we're here, so what's his deal? I really liked RDJ's Sherlock because he was just kind of like this chaotic, dirty weirdo who seemed very at home in his world and could navigate it really well. He's very adaptable. Like once when he's chasing someone, he falls through a ceiling and he uses the dirt that he gets covered with as part of his disguise. And like all of RDJ's characters, even if they're a little bit asshole-ish sometimes, he really makes them very enjoyable to watch through the self-deprecating charm and hard to put your finger on likability that's maybe made him like $1 billion since 2008. On the other hand, I really do think people were very drawn to Benedict Cumberbatch's performance as Sherlock. I think a lot of young women really connected with him on an I can change him basis. They see a character who's not nice to anyone except John sometimes, and they're drawn to him like an unfriendly cat who only lets you pet it. And for that reason, you are special. And this is not to stereotype girls. A lot of girls were normal and liked Harry Styles. But I'm just saying that that is a trope that Sherlock fits into quite nicely. But I'm a little older now. I've met, gone to school with, and worked with, like, I would say maybe most types of guys at this point. And in all my worldly experience, I think it's fair to say that Sherlock sucks. He sucks as a person. In both versions, Sherlock is a little inconsiderate, kind of annoying, hard to deal with, but it really feels like this version of Sherlock genuinely enjoys telling people that they're stupid. And in later episodes, you can see that he does care about the people that he's close to, but honestly, he just never quite treats them all the way like people. Out of curiosity, I looked up some fan montages on YouTube of Sherlock being a precious sweet cinnamon roll, and honestly, I found a lot of the same vibes that I found when I was doing my Louis Tomlinson / Harry Styles shipping research. Like, there's not nothing here, but it's certainly not enough to spend time dwelling on. And something that I could ignore when I was younger, but I definitely can't anymore, is that he is especially cruel to Molly, the girl who has a crush on him.
Listen, I was wondering, maybe later, when you're finished.
You're wearing lipstick. You weren't wearing lipstick before.
I refreshed it a bit.
Sorry, you were saying?
I was wondering if you'd like to have coffee.
Black, 2 sugars, please. I'll be upstairs.
So I actually like that first part of the interaction, because if we're playing Sherlock as this savant who is totally disconnected from other people, I think it is a little funny that for someone who can figure out so much, it just does not compute when someone's trying to hit on him. But he also talks about how her lips are too small and how she's gained weight and says that her breasts are too small and ew. And she is the only character that he's that mean to. It's like he enjoys it. And I am genuinely not sure if he's supposed to be a sexist character or this is the work of sexist writers who think they're being funny. But either way, justice for Molly Hooper. I hope she keys his car. On the other hand, RDJ's Sherlock is still antagonistic to everyone, but it's a little easier to get on his side because he's always being beat up and thrown around. He just kind of saunters through the world in that very specific Robert Downey Jr. way, where he's still believable as an action hero, but he doesn't really take himself too seriously. He's still very mean to Lestrade, but it feels like in more of a jovial, teasing kind of way. When he makes a joke that hurts someone's feelings, it's obvious that he's uncomfortable because he knows he messed up.
And chambermaids were once such a liberal breed.
My wife's a chambermaid. Anyhow, just joking about the wife.
Which implies that he at least a little bit cares about stuff like that. So a very popular Sherlock-hating video essay by H. Bomber Guy accuses the show of being way overproduced. And this is never a complaint that I had before I watched that essay, so I can't really claim that opinion as my own, because I do think that all the text that Sherlock sees and all the little camera tricks that represent his mind palace, if you will, do have a really genuine use to the show. I think they're there to show the audience that Sherlock's mind is always working, showing you all the things he notices, how the genius functions. And we really understand that he sees things that no one else can. There's only one moment in the entire movie where you're kind of shown how RDJ's Sherlock lives, and it's when he's waiting for dinner with John Watson, his fiancée Mary.
Straighten your tie.
Holmes.
With this cacophony of sounds, you can tell that he's constantly overwhelmed by stimuli. So you kind of understand how he can saunter through the world like he does, because he doesn't really exist in it like everyone else. He experiences the world in an entirely different way, too. We just aren't reminded of it as often. Another important aspect of the show is Sherlock's relationship with John, which is another thing that's kind of hard to compare because the show functions as a Sherlock as we know him kind of origin story, with Sherlock and John meeting in the first episode and solving their first mystery together. And that makes total sense because if you're putting Sherlock in a new scenario, it's good to reintroduce him to the audience in a new context through the eyes of Dr. Watson. And I think the show does a really good job of setting up Sherlock and John's relationship. John starts out the series depressed and recovering from his time in Afghanistan, needing a place to stay, and Sherlock reintroduces him to the world of danger and gives him the shove he needs to start living life again. And that's a love story if I've ever seen one. But Sherlock is also, I want to say, comically inconsiderate with John. At one point, he calls John over from the other side of the city because he didn't want to get up and grab a phone from the other side of the room. It's kind of played as a joke, like a lot of the stuff he does, kind of like, whoa, can you get a load of this guy? But it's also just like a really weird, gross thing to do. In later episodes, once it's clear that time has passed, they develop a really strong bond, and they really do have a very endearing chemistry together, but damn, does he put John through a lot. I think that it's really helpful that Sherlock and John already know each other in the movie, so we can jump in and observe their dynamic years into it. It's a really sweet, funny depiction of an incredibly dysfunctional but also very close friendship.
That was my waistcoat.
I thought we agreed it's too small for you.
I'd like it back.
I thought we agreed.
I want it back.
We're told that Sherlock is a bad roommate and a prick, which we are shown many times. But to me, most importantly, all of the dumb, inconsiderate stuff that Sherlock does to John through the course of the movie all have to do with Sherlock feeling left behind. John, at the beginning of the movie, has quit crime solving in order to settle down with his fiancée. So Sherlock leads him to a place of interest against his knowledge, forgets his gun so that John will follow him, knowing that he won't be able to resist a mystery. So while it is incredibly inconsiderate, you can kind of emotionally relate to why he's doing what he's doing. Sherlock also has better relationships with all the cops in the movie because they trust him even when they're told to arrest him by their corrupt bosses. One cop tells him to run so he doesn't have to bring him in, and Lestrade slips him the keys to his handcuffs so he can escape. And even though he does make fun of them,
You know, in another life, you'd have made an excellent criminal.
Yes, and you, sir, an excellent policeman.
and they don't really seem to love him, it does seem like they have a basic respect for each other as people. And the cops in the show absolutely hate Sherlock. It feels like Lestrade tolerates him barely, but the people under him call him a freak, a psycho. It's like they're middle school bullies. He is mean to them back, and while it definitely feels justified because the cops seem openly hostile to basically who he is as a person, it really feels like he is trying to annihilate them. He's stunting on his haters and are murdered by words, if you will. Because at the end of the day, he's still the smart one. I do think that in the series, Sherlock shows great care for Molly, for John, for Mrs. Hudson, and those moments are truly heartwarming, but they do come rather infrequently. And in terms of romantic interests, we have Irene Adler in both adaptations. And in the film, I will say, it does feel like Irene Adler is just kind of fulfilling that role that gives your lead actor one PG-13 smooch, but only one. But that being said, I really do like this character. I think she's really fun to watch. And I do think that it's really endearing of Sherlock to see how much he cares for her, even if he pretends that he doesn't. But I do have to admit that their relationship is a little normie for how strange they are. Irene Adler's episode, A Scandal in Belgravia, was my favorite Sherlock episode back in the day because it has the most to do with Sherlock's character. I love the dichotomy between him and Irene Adler, who in this version is the high-class dominatrix who makes her criminal living blackmailing important people with the stuff she gets out of them. And I appreciated that Sherlock in the show was presented as, if not asexual, just completely uninterested in romantic connection, because it does make sense that someone who lives so much in his head would be a little disconnected. But then you have Irene Adler, a woman who not only rivals Sherlock in intelligence, but also totally throws him off because of her particular set of skills. She's incredibly charming, confident, forward. And because she's built a career on being a blank slate for people to desire, he can't read her. And he is not at all equipped to deal with the energy she's coming at him with. And I really appreciated that no one had any idea what the hell was going on between Irene and Sherlock in this episode.
Oh, you're rather good.
You're not so bad.
Hamish. John Hamish Watson. Just if you were looking for baby names.
And they're just like, I'm just gonna stand back and let this happen because I'm afraid to be in the middle of it. And she tricks him, she taunts him, kind of cruelly. So, spoiler alert, Sherlock has the ultimate last laugh when he eventually proves that she likes him more than he likes her, and he has to save her ass at the end of the episode. While narratively, I think that works great in the context of the episode, him at the end of all this getting to be the winner in this situation just kind of adds to how he's this, like, icy motherfucker.
I won't even last 6 months.
Sorry about dinner.
Because you liked me the whole time, and I didn't even like you like that. Ha. So I think the series definitely starts to find its tone a little later on in the season, because once we've established Sherlock as, you know, kind of a cold bitch, and the show as quippy and a little tonally adversarial, there are more moments of warmth once you get to know the characters. But it still seems like, at least to me, that Benedict Cumberbatch's Sherlock has cool guy syndrome, like Blade or any post-Y2K Tom Cruise movie, where they're just so badass that the narrative can't ever really think to question them or their actions. So in terms of his crime-solving abilities, H. Bomber Guy totally shits on Sherlock for being stupid, or at least written as stupid, but I really do think Sherlock is shown to be very incredibly intelligent in this version. I think what he might have been irritated with is that in the pilot he makes a lot of conjectures based on probabilities.
Phone, it's expensive, email-enabled MP3 player. Are you looking for a flat share? You wouldn't waste money on this. It's a gift, then. Scratch is not one, many over time. It's been in the same pocket as keys and coins. Man sitting next to me wouldn't treat as one luxury item like this, so it's had a previous owner.
So sure, if you slow down and think individually about the assumptions he makes, his logic isn't hard to follow. But to me, what's more impressive are the little minute details he notices and how quickly he can put everything together. He noticed John had a psychosomatic limp because he saw a minute change in his physicality when he was thinking about it versus when he was distracted, and that is just not something that a normal person would notice. He is also shown to be just crazy good at problem solving in a lot of other moments. For example, when he's solving this problem for Irene.
Oh, come on, it's not code. These are seat allocations on a passenger jet. Look, there's no letter I because it can be mistaken for a 1. No letters past K. The width of the plane is the limit. The numbers always appear randomly and not in sequence. But the letters have little runs of sequence all over the place. Families and couples sitting together. Only a jumbo's wide enough to need a letter K or rows past 55, which is why there's always an upstairs. There's a row 13, which eliminates the more superstitious airlines.
He is able to decode a message that no one else can, because he remembers stuff that airlines don't have a seat number 1 and which airlines are superstitious, because he just remembers everything that he's ever been told. I will, however, gripe on the plotting a little bit, specifically in the pilot, which is the episode I watched most carefully for this video, because in the pilot, I do think that the only reason Sherlock doesn't figure out the culprit sooner is because the episode isn't over yet. So the person they're looking for is a cab driver, and Sherlock has this whole monologue about how they need to be looking for someone that lives in the shadows and how no one really notices them. And it just feels like in all of his godlike power, it's just something that he should have figured out. You know, unless you're making the case that Sherlock is classist, and maybe he wouldn't even think of a cabbie as someone who could be pulling something off like that, but that's not a point they ever make. But again, I also feel like I need to point out that the first time I watched this episode, I was eating mac and cheese straight out of the pot in front of my TV, and I thought it was a fucking revelation, so who am I to judge? With RDJ Sherlock, however, it does feel like his logic seems more impressive at a higher rate than BBC's Sherlock, because most of the things he infers aren't really based on conjectures, but how he knows and remembers everything. In one scene, he's blindfolded, but he's able to tell where he is because there's only one bakery in London that uses a certain type of yeast. Then he's able to tell that the villain is a character's father because both of them have a rare type of iris that's only passed down patrilineally. So like, while they are both intended to be maximum smart, I do think that the movie sometimes thinks of better examples to show that to us. So I really would love to give this video a satisfying conclusion and say, which is better 100%. But like I said earlier, which story was more exciting? This made-for-TV drama or this $90 million action comedy with explosions? The film is definitely more exciting minute by minute, but there's definitely something to be said about Moffat's version being as engaging. H-Bomber Guy also had a huge issue with the fact that a lot of the plot connected back to Moriarty in the show. And even though we weren't quite as tech zombified as we are now, I fully don't think that even in 2010, a movie-length Mystery of the Week made-for-TV detective show without some kind of through line would have had people coming back as much as they did. Because let's face it, Columbo would have tanked against Teen Wolf back then. We needed the drama to keep us coming back. But that being said, I actually do think I ended hating on Sherlock the TV show a lot more than I thought I was going to. But I think that is just more about the place in my life that I am now versus where I was in 2010. Most of my criticisms stem from the fact that I don't really have the kind of room in my life for the kind of Reddit moderator cynicism that Sherlock, and by extension its writers, operate on. While I think BBC's Sherlock is shown to care for the people that he loves, I do think that because of how adversarial the world seems to him, the people that don't know him are kind of cruel to him, apparently he doesn't have a single friend, he is always proven right by the narrative of the show. He either stunts on his hater Anderson by saying, oh, you're too dumb to pick up a really easy clue, or he bests Irene Adler by saying that her sentiment for him was the cause of her downfall. And then even at the end of the second season, where he seems to be truly bested by Moriarty and give this great sacrifice for the people that he loves, while he does seem very upset and scared for them, he still comes out on top. Again, I think that Sherlock as a character is someone that we are supposed to have a great reverence for. And unfortunately, at least for me, he's just a little too uncaring, because he says these things that are genuinely mean, but they're kind of played for laughs in a way that I don't really like, especially with Molly Hooper, who is very nice and really only made the mistake of having a crush on him. And I'm not saying that you can't have a flawed, difficult character at the helm of your TV show. I think that Fleabag is a really great example. But at the end of the day, the point of the show, at least to me, is that she is not acting in anyone's best interests, especially her own, and she needs to heal. I know that in both versions Sherlock does love John, but in the movie version he really does seem to atone for his actions. When he's running from the cops, he disguises himself as a doctor so that he can check up on John and be there for him, and he feels guilty because he was the one that made John go there in the first place. And then to apologize to the both of them for being unsupportive of their relationship, he gives them a massive stolen diamond. And not only am I just not sure that BBC's Sherlock is capable of showing that kindness, but I finish an episode of Sherlock and I just have this weird feeling that we're kind of supposed to think he's cool for the way he interacts with people. And I think that in my advanced age, I just am not sure I vibe with a character like that anymore. Because in a world that is already so poisoned by Reddit moderator cynicism, by people being so cynical and adversarial online, it kind of hurts me to turn on the TV and just see more of it. And on top of that, I do think that the movie did a little bit of a better job with plotting. As one of the oldest and saddest specimens that Gen Z has to offer, I understand the ennui of shitty jobs, of not having enough money, of online being a fucking hellscape. BBC Sherlock holds a very special, incredibly nostalgic place in my heart. Because when it came out, I would totally show up to school the next day and be like, oh my god, he's so mean, and everyone has to put up with him anyway, but he's a little nicer to John, so maybe one day they might kiss? So to me, I think that Sherlock the show is more a representative of its time and staple of its decade, in the way that certain Instagram filters or this picture of Kendall Jenner is to some people. But I am here for a good time, not a long time. So going forward, when I want to sit down and watch a Sherlock adaptation, I think I know which one I'm gonna pick. Well, anyway, I don't think y'all ever saw my shirt, but here it is. Cool. Thank you so much for watching. Please let me know if you were an avid Sherlock viewer in the past, if you're still into it, maybe if you don't like it as much as you used to, if you like it more. I'm really curious to see how this show has aged. Yeah. So anyway, thank you so much. Bye.